All right, so let's start with lighting in Unreal Engine 5. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my content folder and I'm going to create a new level. So the way levels work in Unreal Engine 5 is that basically this whole thing that you're seeing right now is a level. And then you can create different levels as well. So this level is right here. It's saved right there. And if I go to File, I go to New Level, and then I can create a new level, which can be with an open world preset, empty open world, basic, or empty level. I'm going to start with empty level because I want to show you guys everything from scratch, how you can sort of build pretty much this exact scene. Not exactly, like not with the mountains and everything, but like you can build a realistic outdoor lighting scene inside of Unreal Engine 5. I'm going to show you guys how to do that from scratch. So I'm just going to select empty level, and then I can create. And now you can see that we have a brand new level right here. There's only a grid, there's no lighting, nothing else is in our scene. So first things first, I'm just going to press Control S on my keyboard and save this level. So at this level, I'm just going to call this UE underscore lighting because we're covering lighting in this level. Let's go ahead and start with creating a basic lighting setup, basic outdoor lighting setup. And that is super, super easy in Unreal Engine 5. All you need to do is you need to go up to Window right there and click this thing called Environment Light Mixer. If you click that, it's going to give you this this new window, and it's going to give you a few options right there. So we're just going to click all of these one by one. So we can click Create Skylight, Directional Light, Atmosphere, Volumetric Cloud, and Height Fog. And once we click all of them and I cross it out, you can see that we have a whole lighting setup ready with a sun right there, some clouds, a sky, and some fog and everything. So that is how outdoor lighting works in Unreal Engine 5. It is super, super simple. I am going to show you how to tweak this and I'm going to show you guys what each of these things that we just added do and then how you can sort of change them. So first things first, directional light is your sun and you can rotate it however you want. So if I rotate it like that, you can see that you can create like a sunset effect and it's automatically going to change the color of the light based on the position. So you can create like a sunset effect. And you can even make night like that. And yeah, and we're going to be making day. And you can obviously change the position however you want. So that is that. The next one is going to be exponential height fog. This basically just gives you some fog. So if I turn it off by clicking this eye icon right there, pressing the eye icon on any of these is going to basically disable them. So if I do that, you're going to see that our fog or our sort of environment or like, you know, our atmosphere sort of just disappeared. So this is what this gives you. And you can also select your exponential height fog and you can go down to the fog density and you can increase it. It's going to make everything more foggy, or you can reduce it to 0, and that's something you can do, right? So I'm just going to undo it like that. And you have different options as well. You can turn on volumetric fog. This is something that I would definitely recommend you to do. It just makes your fog more realistic. So I am going to do that. The next thing in the list is your sky atmosphere. If I turn this off, you can see that it really takes away the atmosphere in our scene and it makes everything black and white. So that is what this does. Atmosphere really makes the sky blue, and it also gives you the control to change the color of the sky. So you can make the sky pretty much any color you want. If you're making like a fictional sort of game, you can sort of tweak this. But I think if you're making a realistic game, you wouldn't really want to mess with this. You can also make your scene like an overcast day using the sky atmosphere, because if you increase the my scattering scale, that's going to make everything overcast. So something like that. You can see that it looks like an overcast day now. If we had any objects in our scene, in fact, let me just add an object so that you guys can see. Let me add shapes. Let's add a cube and let's move here. I just want to show you guys the impact of different lightings on different things. So I can just scale that up like that. And then I can also add another cube on top of it so we can see like the shadows and everything of this. So let's place it right there. So you can see this is how it looks. If I go ahead and reduce my, if I go to my sky atmosphere and set the my scattering scale back to default, it looks more like a, you know, like a regular day. But if I increase it a lot, you're going to see that it's going to look like an overcast day basically. So that's how you can do this. You can also modify the atmosphere height. A higher atmosphere is just going to make things look different. And lower atmosphere is also going to make things look different. So, you know, these are just some things that you can tweak around with, and you can just play around with them and see what looks the best for your specific scene. And yeah, there's a lot of different things there. We're not going to be going into too much detail, but yeah, that's a basic overview. Your skylight is basically like the main light in our scene is your sun. However, everything is sort of reflecting off of the sky as well, right? So this is what gives it sort of that soft lighting effect, and it's what lights up the shadow parts as well. Otherwise, the shadows would be completely dark. So let's turn off skylight. You're going to see that everything, even the like especially the shadow parts, are much darker, and there's not a lot of light being reflected off of the sky to light up the shadow parts. So this is what does that. And make sure to turn on real-time capture in your skylight, otherwise the results are not going to be that good. So yeah, that's the main thing. Apart from that, we can go to volumetric clouds, and these are basically your clouds. You can change the appearance in any way you want. So you can change the layer bottom altitude. You can increase that. It's going to give you more skies, and you can just make different types of skies with this. The flexibility you have with this is pretty good, and you can change your layer height and your tracing distance, tracing start max distance, and there's like many different options that you have here. So yeah, you can play around with this as well. Apart from that, we have I think that's pretty much the important things. There's a cloud material as well, which you can modify to change the appearance of the clouds and the colors and everything. But I'm not going to be covering that for now. So that's how you do natural lighting in Unreal Engine 5. Now we're going to be covering artificial lighting and how you can add custom lights to basically light up indoor scenes, or let's say night scenes, or just any light that wouldn't occur naturally. Let's have that. So for that, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to be deleting all of this. So this whole outdoor lighting setup, I'm going to delete everything, but I'm going to leave the cube, and like both of the cubes, I'm going to leave them so we can actually see the impact of the lights. And we're going to go to add, and we're going to go to lights. And you're going to see we have a whole bunch of different lighting options. Direction light is basically just a sun. That's the exact light that we had in our scene. Point lights, if I just add that, you're going to see that it's basically just going to be one point, which is illuminating light. So if I just increase it, increase the height of it, you can see that it's just one point, which is illuminating light in all directions. And you can increase the intensity here in the details panel and just modify the intensity. And you can also change the attenuation radius. So this radius around it, this sort of sphere around the light, this basically determines how far your light can go. If you increase this, light is going to go far. If you reduce this a lot, you can see that the light is going to be more focused, and it's not going to sort of travel that far. And for now, I'm just going to set it to default, but that's an option that you have. You can also increase your source radius. So if you know anything about lighting, you would know that the bigger your light source is, the larger your light source is, the softer your shadows are. If you've done, let me actually go ahead and show you guys an example. Light source size versus shadows. I'm pretty sure there's going to be good comparisons on the internet. You can see that in this in this object, in the left side, you can basically see that the light source is much larger, so the shadow is a lot softer. And in this one, the light source is much smaller relative to the object. That's why the shadow is much sharper. The reason for that, if you want to go into the physics behind this, is basically that a source that is smaller than the object is not going to create a penumbra, and it's just going to have the umbra. If you've done physics in high school, you would probably know this, but a bigger source is going to create a penumbra because that's how light works in real life. So that's how it works in Unreal Engine 5 as well. If you increase your source radius, you can see that if you make the light bigger, the shadow you can see here is getting a lot softer. So if I go back, source radius 0, shadow is completely sharp. As I increase my source radius, my shadow will also basically become softer. So that's one thing that you can play with. So that's why you have the source radius, and you can increase your size of your object. And also you can increase your source length as well, which is just going to make it like a cylinder, and it's going to make it taller and taller like that. And that is also going to affect your shadows as well. So you can also use temperature. So that's a way to sort of change the color of the light. You can make the light blue by increasing your temperature, or reducing it is going to make it orange and yellowish. So yeah, that's an option that you have. If you turn off affects world setting, it's just not going to affect the world. And if you turn off cast shadows, it's not going to cast any shadows. So those are pretty self-explanatory. Now, because this is a 3D software, it's not completely accurate based on real life. You have these options, which are sort of, which you can use to sort of just fake lighting. And the way it works is that your indirect lighting intensity, you can think of it as how much your shadows are lit up by the object. So the parts of this cube or the surface that this light is directly lighting up, that is the direct lighting intensity that you can change by, adjusting the intensity. But the parts that are covered by shadows, those parts, like the brightness of those parts is going to be controlled by your indirect lighting intensity. So if I increase that, you're going to see that my shadows are going to become much brighter. So let me just zoom in real quick so you guys can see better. So you can see that this part is pretty bright, but if I reduce this, indirect lighting intensity, it becomes pretty dark, right? So generally, if your scene is looking a bit too contrasty or it's looking too dark, then you would probably want to increase this. But do note that this setting is not natural. It's basically a way to sort of cheat lighting. So it is pretty easy to go overboard with this and make your scene look a lot more unrealistic. So yeah, you would definitely want to be careful with this. Just try to use it to make your scene look realistic, but don't go overboard with it. And then we have our volumetric scattering intensity. What this does is that this basically controls the fog in your scene. So right now we don't have any fog because we don't have the exponential height fog element in our scene, but we can go ahead and add that. So let me go to add and say fog, search for fog, and then we can have exponential height fog. Just drag that in your scene. I'm just going to move it down so it doesn't disturb us. But once we have this, we can go down and turn on volumetric fog, and you can automatically see like some fog there. But with this, if I go down, yeah, with the volumetric scattering intensity, you can control the amount of fog we have. So if you increase this, your light is going to emit a lot of fog, and there's going to be a lot of fog in your scene. And if you decrease this to 0, there's going to be pretty much no fog, or like there's going to be some fog because you can't go below 0.25, but there's going to be very little fog. So yeah, that's a setting that you have. I think we have pretty much covered everything that is important. There is some other stuff as well here, which I'm not going to go into detail right now, but if we need it later on, we're going to cover it while we're doing our project. But yeah, so that's the point light. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete this point light, and we're going to add the next type of light, which is going to be a spotlight. So spotlights are self-explanatory. It's basically just a spotlight, and you can control it. So let me just place it like right there. You can control your intensity. You can control your light color. You can control your inner cone angle. So there's an inner cone which is going to have more focused light. So you can change the size of that, and you can also change your outer cone angle. So that is going to be so beyond this outer cone, there's going to be zero light, absolutely zero light. So you can control that as well. And your source radius, again, similarly like the point light, the bigger your source is, the softer your shadows are. So just keep that in mind. And I think pretty much everything else is the same, so I'm not going to be going over it again. So let me just delete that. Our next light is going to be the rect light. This is personally my favorite light because this is the most realistic. If you're doing pretty much any scene, the most realistic option that you have is a rect light because it's an actual light source that you can add to your scene, and you can angle it in different ways, and you can make your scene look a lot better, a lot nicer. So this is what I use mainly. So I'm just going to be placing it right there somewhere. And again, with this, you can change your intensity, light color. So let me just make the color like yellowish, orangish, yellowish, something like that. And then you can change your source width and source height. And similarly in this as well, the bigger your source is, the softer your shadows will be. So if I make the source like really big, something like that, you're going to see that it's going to look, the shadows are going to be much softer. So, and you also have this barn door outside of it. So this is similar to how actual movie sets have real lights. They also have barn doors, so you can change the length of the barn doors and also the angle. So they just focus more light on your object. So that's an option. Although I usually just set it to 0, honestly. And I think everything else is also the same, but I just personally like the look of rect lights and also point lights. So I use both of them in different scenarios, but most of the time I would say I use rect light. So let's delete that. And I think that is pretty much it. Yeah, we have skylight as well, which we covered before. This is your skylight, the one which you added with the environment light mixer. So I'm not going to go over it again. But I think that was pretty much it for the lighting. All right, so now that we know the basics of lighting, let's go over something very, very important. That is your post-process volume. So it's a volume that you can use to essentially post-process your scene and add different effects and stuff. And I think it's one of the most important things to make your scene look better and make your scene look actually good and realistic. So let's go over that and let's cover it. So for that, I'm going to go to Window first, and I'm just going to go to my environment light mixer and just add all the lights, add like a basic outdoor lighting setup so that at least we have something to work with. So if you notice, by default in Unreal Engine 5, the way your exposure setting works is that it's auto exposure. Let's say you look at a very bright object, for example, the sun, your scene is going to get darker and your exposure is going to get darker. But for example, if you move and go to like something very dark, let's say this scene, your exposure is automatically going to get brighter, and then it's going to reduce when you go out of that scene. So I'm not sure if it's super visible or not, but if you go to someplace very dark, your scene is automatically going to increase your exposure like that. and make it look brighter. So yeah, that's what I mean. That's how it works basically. We can change this. We can set it to manual exposure. For that, we're gonna need our post-process volume. And I mean, that's just one thing that your post-process volume can do. You can do many, many other things with it as well. So let's go to add. Let's search for post-process volume. So it's gonna come up like this, and it's gonna be like a cube. It's gonna be a volume basically. And by default, the way it works is that it's only gonna affect when you are inside the volume. It's only going to affect the world when you're inside the volume. If you get out of it, it's not going to affect anything. But you can change that. You can change it to basically be unbound, and you can set it to essentially affect the whole level. So we're going to do that. So for that, I'm going to go to search. I'm going to search for unbound, and you're going to see this thing called infinite extent, and in parentheses, it's going to say unbound. So just check that. And now everything in the scene will be affected by this post-process volume. So we can just move it down and, you know, get it out of sight so that it doesn't disturb us. But if we cross it out, you can see that we have a whole bunch of different settings, settings that you would have in any sort of video editing or like color grading software. And you have a whole bunch of things to tweak with. So let's start with the first thing that we're going to be covering, which is going to be exposure. So if you turn on this metering mode, it's going to say auto exposure histogram by default. You can set it to manual, but it's going to turn things super dark. So what you can do is you can go to your exposure compensation, and you can increase this to set an exposure for your scene. So if you set it to something like 9, now the exposure is going to be constant for your whole scene. I think 9 is a bit dark, 10 should be good. So let's say you set it to 10. Now, even if you go to the dark part, it's not gonna, and it's gonna make your scene a lot more sort of predictable, and it's gonna make it easier for you to sort of make different tweaks, because your view is not gonna be changing all the time, you know, so it just makes everything a lot better. So I just set it to manual exposure. You have some other options here as well, but I personally have never used these. So let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. So let's go to bloom next. Bloom, if you know, is an effect. It's essentially fog, and it makes things look shinier or dreamier in a sense. So you can add more of it, or you can remove it if you want. So I'm just going to turn on two settings right there, method and intensity. So you have standard method, and then you have convolution method. So if I increase the intensity of standard, you can see that everything is going to look a lot dreamier, and it's going to have, everything's going to have a glow around it. So that's an effect that you can have in games. And I think a little bit of bloom makes things look more realistic, because bloom actually happens in real life as well in cameras. So that's an option that you have. You can also change it to convolution, which in my opinion looks a lot more realistic. Like you can see that the bloom in the sun changed completely. If I set it back to standard, it's just a glow, but that's not how it works in real life. If you point a camera towards the sun, this is more likely what you will see. So we're going to set it to convolution, which is more realistic in my opinion. And you can also increase your intensity for that as well. And it's going to have that sort of, I think, I'm not sure what it is, but like you can see that like some parts are green, some parts are pink around it. And it just makes it look a lot more realistic in my opinion. So I think that's a pretty good setting to turn on. So now everything that is brighter than, you know, a certain amount of brightness is going to have this glow around it. After that, we can go and add some chromatic aberration. What this does is that basically, if you've recorded with a camera, what happens is that at the very edges, there's a little bit of separation in the green, blue, and red channels. If that makes no sense to you, that's perfectly fine. I'm just going to be showing you an example. So if I increase the intensity of it, you can see that if I set it to 5, you can see around the edges, like when an object is in the middle, it's like mostly fine. But as it moves closer to the edge, I want you to look at this cube. The color channels of this object are separating, and it makes it look like it's this glitchy effect. So now in real life cameras, there's a slight bit of chromatic aberration by default. Especially the cheaper your camera is, the more chromatic aberration it's going to have. So just adding something like 0.2, something like that, just makes your scene look a bit better. And if something is at the very edge, there's going to be a slight separation, and it's going to make it look, you know, just that much better. So once we have this done, we can go down to the next important setting, which is going to be lens flares. I know I'm skipping some because I personally never use them, and I don't think most game developers in Unreal Engine 5 use it, but you have those options and you can explore them on your own. Lens flares, what they are is that, I mean, the name is self-explanatory. If you turn it on, it's going to give you this lens flare effect. I think it's too intense for now, so I'm going to reduce intensity, something like that. But I think a slight bit of lens flare is just going to make it look a bit better, and it's going to, you know, if you're especially playing a game, I think lens flares really add a lot to it, and it makes it look much more realistic. I think the intensity is a bit too much still. Let me just lower it like that. So that we have, you know, just a slight bit of a lens flare, not a lot. I think that looks pretty good. You can also change the tint of your lens flare. So if I move here, you can make them different colors if you want. So that's an option that you have. But I think you would only want to do that if you're making like a stylized game. In realistic games, you probably wouldn't do that. You have some other options here. Then we can move on to your color grading setting, which is my personal favorite. So I'm just going to be placing my camera somewhere there and we can sort of color grade this shot. So let's change the temperature first. You have your white balance option and then you have your temperature option. So you can make your scene warmer like that, or you can make your scene cooler. So you have different options. I think I'm just going to make it a slight bit warmer. And you also have tint as well. So you can, make your scene green or purple. You have your options there. I think I'm going to give it this like filmic look, which is like yellow and green and stuff like that. And then after that, we have this global setting, which gives you option for saturation, contrast, gamma, gain, and offset. I mainly just use saturation and contrast. So I'm just going to be using those for now as well. I'm going to increase the contrast something like 1.2, maybe even 1.4. That's going to make it look, more contrasty and just better, in my opinion. And then you can increase your saturation as well to maybe 1.2. And you can see that you can really sort of make your scene a lot different, and you can add these color effects based on whatever you want to do. And then you can change your gamma, gain, and offset as well. I'm personally not going to do that. And then you have your shadows, all these settings in your shadows as well, all these settings in your midtones and highlights as well. Yeah, so these are your color grading settings. I'm not going to be going into too much detail for now because this is just supposed to be an introduction. We are going to color grade our game, like, the scene of our game, we're going to grade it. So, you guys are going to learn a lot in that as well. But for now, I think that should be pretty much it for your post-process volume. You have some settings down here which are important, but we're going to be going over it later when we're post-processing our game. I don't want this part to be too long. I know it's getting boring because we're doing setting after setting, but please just try to push through this part. I assure you that the game itself is going to be a lot more fun. And yeah, so these are some settings which we're going to cover later on. So yeah, that was pretty much your post-process volume. You can see that you have a lot of different options there. If I turn it off, this is how your scene looked before, and this is how it looks with your grading. So, you have a lot of freedom there. You can do whatever you want. So that's what your post-process volume is for. So now I think we can move on to our next part, which is going to be adding materials and modifying materials and all that stuff.